There's a moment every man experiences, the point where your energy is drained, your effort unappreciated, and your silence becomes louder than your words. And the truth is, when you finally decide to ignore her, everything changes. The woman who once felt in control suddenly begins to feel something she never expected, the loss of your attention. But what happens next will shock you. Because the moment you detach, you don't just change how she sees you, you change how she sees herself. There comes a point in every connection where words lose their value, where endless conversations, explanations, and emotional justifications do nothing but drain your energy and dilute your presence. That's where silence steps in, not as an act of revenge, but as a declaration of self-worth. Silence is not emptiness. It's energy redirected inward. It's the quiet reminder that your peace is sacred, that your emotions are not up for negotiation every time someone challenges your boundaries. When you stop explaining, when you stop chasing, when you stop trying to prove your worth through words, you begin to create a powerful shift in energy. You move from seeking validation to embodying strength. Your silence becomes louder than your presence ever was because it forces the other person to feel what they used to hear. It makes them sit with the absence of your energy, and that absence carries more truth than any argument could ever express. When a woman is used to your constant availability, your constant presence, and your emotional investment, silence becomes the one thing she cannot handle. She knows how to respond to attention, to affection, to pursuit. But silence creates confusion. It breaks her rhythm. Suddenly, she doesn't have control over your reactions. She doesn't know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, or if you even care anymore. That uncertainty becomes the spark of curiosity, and curiosity quickly turns into introspection. The very same woman who once took your energy for granted begins to question her own actions. She starts to recall the moments where she dismissed your effort, where she assumed your love was guaranteed, where she believed that no matter how she behaved, you'd always return. Your silence becomes a mirror, showing her what words never could. It reflects her behavior back to her, stripped of excuses and distractions. But the real power of silence isn't about making her miss you. It's about regaining control of your own emotional space. When you go quiet, you reclaim your mind from overthinking, your heart from attachment, and your soul from chaos. You stop feeding situations that drain you and start nourishing the parts of you that had been neglected. Silence teaches discipline, the kind that doesn't come from suppression but from awareness. It shows you that not every emotion deserves expression, not every thought deserves reaction, and not every connection deserves maintenance. You begin to realize that peace is not found in trying to fix others. It's found in allowing yourself to be still, to observe, to detach without bitterness. That is where your power grows quietly, invisibly, unshakably. And while you're grounded in your silence, the world around you starts to respond differently. The same woman who once felt confident in your pursuit now feels uncertain in your absence. She begins to see the weight of your presence, the stability your attention once brought. Silence makes her realize that your energy was never ordinary. It was something she had unknowingly relied upon. She starts noticing the difference between noise and connection, between attention and value. And as your silence deepens, so does her realization. Because silence doesn't chase, it attracts. It doesn't beg to be understood, it demands to be felt. It doesn't argue for respect, it silently redefines it. That's why silence is not weakness. It's emotional intelligence in its purest form. It's the quiet power that shifts everything without saying a single word. When you first withdraw your attention, when you pull back your energy and stop giving her the constant reassurance she's used to, something powerful happens inside her. An emotional storm begins to rise. At first, it's not love that reacts, it's the ego. That sudden silence feels like rejection, and rejection to a woman who once felt desired hits deeply. Her mind begins to race, trying to understand what went wrong. The emotional reaction is impulsive. It's rooted in fear, pride, and confusion. She may feel anger, sadness, or even panic, not because she truly misses you yet, but because the validation she once depended on has been cut off. That's the ego's way of screaming for attention, of trying to regain control over something it feels slipping away. It's not about affection, it's about dominance over the emotional dynamic that used to feed her sense of importance. She might post things online, act indifferent, or pretend she's unaffected, but beneath that surface lies a storm of insecurity, questioning why your silence feels so different from the attention she used to take for granted. Emotional reactions are raw and impulsive. They're the heart's desperate attempt to protect the ego from loss. When a woman is used to controlling the rhythm of connection through emotional highs and lows, your detachment disrupts that rhythm entirely. It creates a void, a silence she cannot interpret. Her emotions might tell her to fight for attention, to provoke a response, to test your patience just to see if you still care. That's why she may say things that seem cold or distant, because emotional reaction often disguises itself as indifference. But in reality, emotional chaos is just the mask for inner confusion. Her ego tells her to reclaim control, while her heart whispers that something feels different this time. She may even convince herself that ignoring you back will restore her power, not realizing that this reaction only deepens her inner conflict. The more she reacts emotionally, the less clarity she has. Because emotion thrives on immediacy, it seeks comfort now, even at the cost of peace later. And then comes the shift, the slow, unsettling moment when emotion gives way to thought. Once her initial reaction burns out, rational response begins to emerge. She starts to see that her emotional outburst did not bring her what she wanted. It didn't draw you back. It didn't restore the connection. That realization hits differently. It's no longer about ego, but about understanding. The rational mind begins to analyze what happened, why your silence feels heavier than any words you've spoken, why your absence holds more meaning than your presence once did. Rational response is slower, quieter, more introspective. It's not driven by the need to win, but by the need to understand. It's the moment when she looks back on her behavior, her choices, and her attitude with a new awareness. She begins to see how emotional impulsiveness pushed you away, how her own reactions created the very distance she feared. That's when the emotional storm begins to settle and introspection begins to bloom. But the beauty of this stage is not in her realization, it's in your restraint. Because you didn't feed her emotions with reactions, you allowed her to face them. By not responding impulsively, you held up a mirror instead of a megaphone. You gave her the space to see her own patterns clearly without your interference. This is where your silence becomes her teacher, guiding her from emotional reaction toward rational reflection. In that process, she starts to understand the depth of what was lost, not just attention, but the emotional safety your presence represented. And while her ego still resists, her rational mind starts to accept that what she thought was control was merely dependence on your energy. That's the silent shift that happens when emotion finally meets truth, when chaos slowly transforms into clarity, and when she begins to see the difference between wanting to be right and wanting to be at peace. The confusion stage begins quietly, almost invisibly. It's that strange in-between moment when she starts to notice your energy slipping away, but doesn't yet understand why. At first, she tells herself it's temporary, that you're just busy, distracted, or maybe slightly distant because of something unrelated. But as days pass and the familiar rhythm of attention fades, confusion begins to take hold. She starts checking her phone more often, scrolling through old conversations, replaying memories in her mind, trying to find clues to when the shift began. The silence becomes louder with each passing day, and her mind begins to fill that silence with questions. It's not love that drives this phase, it's uncertainty. Uncertainty is a powerful emotional force because it destabilizes the ego. When she doesn't know where she stands with you, when she can't read your thoughts or anticipate your reactions, her inner balance begins to shake. The woman who once seemed so composed and confident starts to lose her sense of control, not because of what you did, but because of what you stopped doing. During this stage, her behavior may seem unpredictable. One moment she might act indifferent, pretending she doesn't care. The next, she might subtly try to re-engage. She could post pictures, make vague statements, or even mention you indirectly through stories or shared spaces. These are not random acts. They're quiet attempts to regain the connection. Confusion drives her to test the waters, to see if the silence can be broken without her fully admitting how much it bothers her. She doesn't want to appear vulnerable, but she also can't stand not knowing where she stands. This inner battle is what makes the confusion stage so emotionally intense. The heart wants answers, but the pride refuses to ask directly. So she oscillates between pretending she's fine and quietly seeking validation from the smallest signs. Every little thing you do or don't do suddenly becomes a message she tries to decode. Your silence becomes a language she's desperately trying to understand, yet can't translate. The confusion deepens when she realizes her usual strategies no longer work. Before, she could send a simple message, show a bit of attitude, or withdraw temporarily to pull you closer. But now, none of that works. The energy feels different. You're not reacting. You're not chasing. You're not feeding her emotions with responses. And that's when it truly hits her that something has changed. The old patterns are broken and she can no longer predict the outcome. That unpredictability becomes emotionally exhausting for her because it forces her to face herself. She starts questioning her role in the situation, wondering if she pushed too far, if she said something wrong, or if she's finally lost the hold she once had. In her mind, confusion becomes a form of discomfort, a constant mental noise she can't silence. It's the gap between her expectation and your new reality, and that gap becomes impossible to ignore. As this confusion grows, it begins to affect how she sees you. The absence of attention doesn't make her forget you. It makes her notice you in a completely new way. She starts remembering the energy you brought into her life, the stability, the comfort of knowing you were there. Now that you're not, the contrast becomes too clear to deny. And the irony of the confusion stage is that while she's trying to figure out what's happening to the connection, what's really happening is transformation. Your silence is forcing her to feel, to reflect, to face the emotions she used to escape by controlling the situation. The confusion stage is where realization begins to form beneath the surface. It's the emotional fog that precedes clarity, the storm before awareness. And though she doesn't yet understand it, this very confusion is the beginning of a deeper awakening within her. The shift in energy is subtle at first, almost imperceptible, yet it changes everything about the dynamic between you and her. It begins the moment she realizes that your presence is no longer immediate, that your attention is no longer guaranteed, and that the familiar patterns she once relied on to predict your reactions no longer exist. This absence creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum, her energy begins to change. She feels it first as a quiet unease, a subtle tension she cannot explain. Her thoughts drift more often toward you, and she starts analyzing your behavior with a level of focus she never needed before. The playful confidence she once wore effortlessly begins to falter because she senses that control has shifted. She is forced to confront an uncomfortable truth that your energy was never ordinary, and now that it's not readily available, she has to reconcile with the gap between expectation and reality. As the days pass, this shift becomes more pronounced. The woman who once dictated the flow of attention now finds herself reacting to it rather than orchestrating it. She might try to regain control through subtle gestures, small tests, or attempts to provoke a reaction, but these efforts only reveal her growing awareness that the power balance has changed. Her energy, once outwardly focused on manipulation or testing, starts turning inward. She begins to feel the absence of your presence as a reflection of her own reliance on your attention. That shift is disorienting, but it is also necessary. It awakens an awareness she couldn't achieve when the energy was constant and predictable. Suddenly, she sees that her attempts to provoke you are not as effective, and the need to chase your validation diminishes, replaced by a quiet recognition of what she lost when she assumed your energy was infinite. This is also the stage where the emotional weight of your absence becomes tangible. The shift in energy is not just hers, it is yours as well. By maintaining your calm, your detachment, and your focus on yourself, you radiate a new kind of presence. It is not loud or demanding, it is steady, grounded, and magnetic. Your energy no longer revolves around her reactions, but around your own growth, your own boundaries, and your own peace. This shift is felt deeply, even if unspoken, because energy communicates on a level words cannot reach. She starts to notice the difference between chasing and being chased, between trying to influence and observing with curiosity. Your silence and composure amplify the contrast between what she thought she had and what she now experiences. As her focus begins to internalize, she starts to see you through a new lens. The energy that was once predictable now feels rare and valuable. She remembers the moments when your presence brought stability and calm, when your attention was intentional, when your engagement was meaningful. In the absence of this energy, she begins to reflect on the subtle nuances she once ignored, the strength in your quiet, the depth in your detachment, and the respect embedded in your self-possession. She starts to feel the pull, not because of manipulation, but because energy always signals truth. The shift in energy is a silent lesson in value and respect. It recalibrates her perception of you and of herself, because in learning to cope with the absence, she begins to recognize the significance of the presence she once took for granted. This shift also alters the emotional climate between you both. Tension replaces complacency, awareness replaces assumption, and desire begins to emerge from respect rather than expectation. Your energy no longer revolves around chasing approval or attention. It becomes a force of attraction, subtle yet undeniable. She may act differently, think differently, and even feel differently, but all of it is a response to the profound change in the flow of energy, the unseen but deeply felt recalibration that signals she no longer holds the upper hand in the dynamic, and that your value is now measured not by words, but by the quiet consistency of your presence or absence. The return game begins long before she actually reaches out. It starts in her mind, in the quiet moments when she notices your absence more than she expected. After experiencing the silence, after navigating the confusion and the emotional turbulence caused by your detachment, she begins to feel a pull that is hard to resist. At first, she may resist it herself, telling herself that she doesn't need to reach out, that she has her pride, that she's fine without your attention. But that inner voice of resistance is slowly drowned out by realization. She starts thinking about the moments when your presence brought her calm, when your attention felt effortless, when your energy made her feel seen in ways she couldn't articulate. The return game is not a conscious plan at first. It is a natural response to a vacuum your absence created. It is her way of trying to reclaim what she lost, to restore a connection she may have underestimated, to test if the bond she once took for granted still exists. Her attempts in this phase are often subtle at first, almost hesitant, because pride and fear compete with desire. She may send casual messages trying to appear indifferent while secretly hoping for a reaction. She might comment on your posts, create situations where your attention is likely to be caught, or bring herself into shared social spaces intentionally. These small actions are her way of gauging whether you've changed, whether the energy you've cultivated through silence and detachment has altered the dynamic between you. In many ways, the return game is a dance of observation and testing, where every gesture carries a hidden message. She wants to see if the peace you've created is real, if your detachment is authentic, and if the respect she once assumed is still present. The subtlety of her moves is a reflection of the internal struggle. Her ego wants to regain control, her heart wants the connection, and her mind is carefully analyzing every signal you send, looking for validation of what she hopes is still possible. As the return game progresses, her actions may become more intentional, more vulnerable, and even more revealing of her true feelings. She starts to realize that the dynamic has shifted, that your attention is no longer a given, and that the respect you now command cannot be won through games or manipulation. She may express interest in what you're doing, ask questions about your life, or initiate conversations that are meaningful rather than casual. Every step she takes is measured against the awareness that the balance has changed, that she can no longer take your energy for granted. This is where the power of your silence and detachment becomes most evident, because it forces her to confront the value of what she is trying to regain. She begins to see that her previous behaviors, which may have been careless or manipulative, will no longer work, and that to reconnect, she must approach with authenticity, respect, and intention. The transformation of value is a process that unfolds quietly but with undeniable intensity, and it begins the moment she experiences the absence of your attention as something significant rather than trivial. When a woman is accustomed to constant energy, constant engagement, and the reassurance of your presence, she often takes the value you provide for granted. Your messages, calls, or expressions of care become background noise, something she assumes will always be there regardless of how she behaves. But when you withdraw, not out of anger, not out of punishment, but out of self-respect, the landscape shifts completely. Suddenly, your presence is no longer ordinary. Your attention is no longer guaranteed. What she once overlooked becomes impossible to ignore. And in that void, the value she had underestimated begins to transform. This transformation does not happen through words or arguments. It happens through perception, through energy, and through the realization that what she assumed was permanent can, in fact, be fleeting. The first stage of this transformation is recognition. She begins to notice the subtle things she once ignored, the consistency of your behavior, the strength in your calm, the depth in your detachment, the respect inherent in your silence. These are qualities that often go unnoticed when attention is freely given, but when attention is withheld, they become magnified. She realizes that your presence was never casual, that your energy was deliberate, and that your investment was meaningful. This recognition sparks reflection. She starts replaying moments in her mind, analyzing situations where she may have undervalued your effort, dismissed your perspective, or assumed your love was unconditional without reciprocating the same level of respect. The transformation of value begins internally for her. It is not something she can articulate immediately because it is tied to a deeper emotional and psychological awakening that happens when she experiences the consequences of taking your energy for granted. As recognition evolves into awareness, she begins to measure her behavior against this new understanding. The value of your attention, your presence, and your respect becomes a standard, and she starts to see the disparity between what she once had and what she truly needs. Her mind begins to connect the dots between her actions and the resulting absence, and she starts to comprehend the power that comes with restraint. She sees that value is not something declared or demanded. It is something demonstrated through action, through consistency, and through self-respect. This realization can feel uncomfortable, even confronting, because it forces her to acknowledge her previous disregard for the energy you contributed to the connection. The transformation of value is not punitive. It is educational. It teaches her that respect and attention are earned, that emotional security is not automatic, and that the energy she once dismissed is actually rare and significant. In the final stage of this transformation, the shift moves beyond recognition and awareness into genuine appreciation. She begins to approach interactions differently, not out of manipulation or strategy, but from a place of newfound respect and understanding. The dynamic between you is no longer the same because the imbalance that existed when she assumed your energy was limitless has been corrected. She may attempt to reconnect, but now her intentions carry authenticity rather than entitlement. The transformation of value manifests as a subtle but powerful shift in her energy toward admiration and respect, because she has learned that your attention, your time, and your presence are not obligations. They are privileges that must be honored and reciprocated. She begins to internalize that the connection is not just about what she can take, but about what she contributes. And in this internal recalibration, your worth is recognized more clearly than ever before, and the dynamic evolves into one of mutual respect, conscious engagement, and measured appreciation. The return game is not about manipulation or control. It is about awakening awareness and prompting introspection. As she begins to reach out, she experiences a shift in perspective. She starts understanding what your presence meant in her life and how much your detachment impacted her. Perception of value and respect. It is a subtle yet profound transformation because in attempting to reconnect, she is forced to reflect on her past behavior, her own emotional patterns, and the ways in which she may have taken you for granted. At the same time, it gives you the opportunity to observe, to evaluate, and to maintain your boundaries while allowing her attempts to show authenticity. The return game is a dance of energy, perception, and awareness, where every interaction becomes a silent test of intent, a reflection of growth, and a measure of whether the connection can be rebuilt with mutual understanding, respect, and emotional alignment. In the journey of detachment and silence, every stage, from emotional reaction to rational response, from confusion to the shift in energy, through the return game and the transformation of value, reveals a deeper truth about connection, respect, and self-worth. Ignoring a woman is not about punishment. It is about reclaiming your energy, protecting your peace, and demonstrating the power of presence through absence. Each reaction she experiences, each attempt to regain attention, and each moment of reflection is a response to the space you've created, a space that allows her to see the depth of your value, the consistency of your boundaries, and the authenticity of your self-respect. What begins as silence becomes a mirror, a teacher, and ultimately a catalyst for transformation, shifting her perception from taking your attention for granted to recognizing its true significance. This process doesn't require words, arguments, or explanations. It works through the natural laws of energy and human psychology. Your calm detachment disrupts old patterns, forces introspection, and inspires respect without demanding it. She begins to notice the subtle qualities she once overlooked: the confidence in your silence, the strength in your absence, the integrity in your self-possession. Through this, she learns that your attention is not a commodity, but a reflection of your priorities and values, and that what she once assumed was permanent must now be earned. Ultimately, the entire journey is a lesson in balance and authenticity. By holding your ground, staying true to your own energy, and resisting the urge to chase validation, you transform not only her perception of you, but also the dynamic of your connection. She starts to approach the relationship differently, with more awareness, respect, and sincerity, and you emerge stronger, more centered, and fully aligned with your own worth. The power lies not in controlling her, but in mastering your own presence. And through that mastery, everything shifts. Her respect deepens, her attention becomes intentional, and the bond, if it continues, evolves into one rooted in genuine understanding and mutual appreciation.